Let's go ahead and get started today. Hello, everyone. We are here today with Texas Legal Services Center KinCare Project, and we'll be giving you a presentation on certain identification documents you may need to obtain for a child in your care. This is the fourth in our six-part webinar series. These are set on the third Wednesday of each month at noon through August. Our next webinar is going to be scheduled for July 15th. You can sign up for the remaining webinars or view completed webinars on the YouTube link accessed from TLSC's website, tlsc.org. And just a brief introduction, my name is Kayleen Kunzel, and I'm a staff attorney with the KinCare Project.
And my name is Mary Doherty, and I'm also a staff attorney with the KinCare Project.
So before we begin, we want to give you a little bit of background information on Texas Legal Services Center. So TLSC is a statewide nonprofit organization that provides legal advice, advocacy, and representation and education. We currently have over a dozen practice areas that are geared towards civil law issues that impact low-income Texans. And for our mission, the TLSC mission is to ensure equal justice for all Texans by educating, empowering, and representing vulnerable people while reshaping the greater legal system that impacts us all. Now, a little bit about our team. Our team at TLSC is the child welfare team. We have the Family Helpline, which is a free helpline that provides legal information around child protective services. And we'll give more information about that later in the presentation. We also have our KinCare Project, which we'll also provide more information about. And then our team is currently made up of 5 attorneys and 1 social worker, and we provide legal information, education, and advice and representation. Now I'll go ahead and turn it over to Mary.
Today's presentation is all about how kinship caregivers can obtain identification documents for the children in their care. The documents we'll cover today include birth certificates, social security cards, and passports. After that, we'll share some resources that may be helpful to you as kinship caregivers when you're trying to get identification documents and just in general. In this section of our presentation, we'll discuss obtaining identification documents. First, let's talk about some reasons that having identification documents such as birth certificates, social security cards, and passports may be helpful to a kinship caregiver. Number 1, identification documents can help with school enrollment. Public schools generally require a birth certificate or other identification document to enroll a child in school. There may be some exceptions, but having the documents will make the process easier. Having identification documents will also help with the process of applying for public benefits. If you're planning to travel with the child, especially outside of the US, having the right identification documents is important. Identification documents are important for being able to obtain other identification documents. For example, having a copy of the birth certificate makes it easier to obtain other documents like social security cards, passport, and when they're older, a Texas ID or a driver's license. To generally function in our society, it's useful for a person to have their official identification documents. So it's important for a kinship caregiver to get those if possible. When kinship caregivers try to get copies of identification documents for a child, there are often challenges or obstacles that arise. Throughout our presentation, we'll talk about several examples and possible solutions. We'll also share some resources that kinship caregivers can access to help if they're facing challenges in getting identification documents for the child. Some difficulties that may exist are only having copies, not originals or certified copies of documents, not having authority to get the child's documents, not having necessary documents or information to apply for the child's identification documents, or confusing forms or processes for requesting documents. Some additional challenges may include long wait times for an appointment or for processing, or the fees involved. Now I'll pass it back to Kayleen.
Next, we'll talk about birth certificates. If a caregiver is trying to get identification documents for a child, this is generally the first document that should be obtained. I'll go over some of the basics of obtaining a birth certificate for a child, and then we'll discuss some common issues that people face and possible solutions to those. So first, there's a few things that are needed to request the child's birth certificate. You'll first need to complete a Form VS-140. When a caregiver applies for a birth certificate, they'll also need to present their own identification documents as the requester. These documents are to show who the person is that is requesting the birth certificate for the child. There's also fees that will be included for the application of the process or for the application to be processed. Those will need to be paid. And once you've completed your application and gathered the necessary documents, you'll have to submit the application with the fees. So the list of who can apply for a child's birth certificate is pretty limited. The state of Texas only allows for certain family members or those with a legal relationship to the child to apply for birth certificates on a child's behalf. This includes a parent, an adult sibling, someone who's a legal guardian, and of course, once people are adults and on their own, they can request their own birth certificates. In Texas, the person requesting the birth certificate will need to provide their identification. It doesn't matter if the birth certificate you're requesting is for someone else, such as the child that you're caring for. As the requester, you'll be required to submit certain identification documents. And then the birth certificates will need to be requested from the state that the child was born in. So this applies even if the child was born elsewhere but adopted in Texas. For example, if a child was adopted in Texas but born in Montana, the child's birth certificate will need to be requested from the state of Montana. If you have to request a birth certificate from another state, keep in mind that each state will have different rules for what is required to request a birth certificate. It's important to find out what the requirements are for the specific state you need to request the birth certificate from, because each state has its own set of rules on how to do this. So there are 3 different ways to submit an application for a birth certificate. The first option is online through the Texas Department of State Health Services Office of Vital Statistics. The website for that is listed here. A caregiver requesting a birth certificate also has the option to do so in person. This can be done either at the local office closest to where the requester lives or at the main Austin office. And the third option would be to send the application and all required documents by mail. Keep in mind if something isn't completed correctly or if a document is missing, this can be more timely due to the time that it takes to communicate back and forth by snail mail. So next, we're going to go over some of the common issues that people come across when they're trying to apply for a child's birth certificate, along with potential solutions to these issues. So the first common issue is what happens if the caregiver is a relative of the child's father, but the father's not on the birth certificate. So for example, the child's parental or paternal grandma or dad's mom is the caregiver of the child. She needs to request the child's birth certificate, but dad is not listed. So what do we do then? So one possible solution would be to establish paternity. There are a few ways in which paternity can be established, but it's important to note that a caregiver can't make this request on behalf of the father. Only a parent or agency can file a petition for paternity. So dad's mom in this scenario where dad is not on the birth certificate would not be able to take the steps to establish paternity. It would have to be the child's parent or a state agency, such as the Office of the Attorney General. There are a few ways that paternity can be established, which are listed here. If this is an issue that you're coming across, you can find more information on how paternity can be established at texaslawhelp.org. So another common issue is that the person applying for the child's birth certificate isn't one of the family members that the state has listed as allowed to request the birth certificate. So remember, the list that I reviewed was fairly short and included a parent, a legal guardian, an adult sibling, and of course, an adult on their own behalf. So a possible solution to overcome this would be to have mom or dad give authorization to the caregiver through what's known as a Chapter 34 authorization. When these are properly executed, this document allows a non-parent caregiver to do things such as enroll a child in school, request benefits for a child, seek medical treatment for a child, and request identification records such as a birth certificate or social security card. While this option seems simple if either parent is agreeable to assisting with this, the form must be properly executed for it to be valid. So there's a few things that you want to keep in mind if you are trying to obtain this authorization. So at least one parent has to sign the authorization. This means the same issue that we previously discussed with dad not being listed on the birth certificate may come up here. So if dad's not on the birth certificate, he can't sign the form as a parent. Only mom would be able to. Additionally, the language in the statute for the Chapter 34 authorization requires that a parent be the one to sign. So even if the child has someone that's legally a conservator or has custody of them legally, if they're not the biological parent, due to the language in the statute, they can't complete and sign this authorization. In addition to a parent signing the authorization, it has to be notarized. So that's an extra step that people might have to take it to the notary and get them to notarize that. And then a copy of the signed and notarized authorization agreement must be sent by certified mail to the other legal parent within 10 days of it being signed. A separate authorization has to be completed for each child. So keep in mind if you're caretaking for multiple children, even if they have the same parents, they will each require their own Chapter 34 authorization form. And last, just to keep in mind that some district clerk's offices or vital statistics offices may still give denials or some resistance on this type of authorization, possibly because they're not familiar with it. So if this happens to you, you can call our KinCare project and we can provide some assistance. One big reminder on these authorizations that we cannot stress enough is that this is only a permission slip, not custody. So even if someone has a properly signed authorization in their possession, they don't have legal rights to the children. This authorization is simply permission to do things outlined on the authorization. It does not eliminate or change the legal rights of the parents. Unless a specified termination date is listed, it will automatically renew every 6 months. However, a parent can revoke the authorization at any time. TexasLawHelp.org provides more details and a form that can be used for this type of authorization. So if you're requesting a birth certificate on behalf of a child, you'll have to provide your own identification documents with the application. This brings up the common issue of what if I don't have, something like a driver's license or other form of valid identification. There are several types of identification that may be accepted to do this. However, depending on the type of identification you're able to provide as a requester, the Office of Vital Statistics may require maybe more than one form of identification or a variation of what they'll accept. So the website listed here provides the different types that are accepted along with the specific requirements, depending on the type of identification that's going to be included with the application. So if you're submitting one of these, I highly recommend that you go and check this document out so that you're submitting the correct forms of identification. And then the last common question that comes up with applications is what if I can't afford the fees to order the child's birth certificate? There are a couple of possible solutions depending on the family situation. Homeless youth or victims of family or dating violence do have some options to have fees waived, but that will require certification from certain individuals that have worked with the family. So keep that in mind if that's something that you're looking to. And I'll turn it over to Mary again to discuss Social Security cards.
Yes, let's talk about Social Security cards next. The first time a person gets a Social Security card, they're also given a Social Security number. If the person was born in a hospital in the United States, the birth parent probably completed an application to get a Social Security card for them when they were born, and they were issued a number. Even if a person replaces their Social Security card, the Social Security number does not change. Applying for a Social Security card for a child as a kinship caregiver requires filling out the SS5 application. This can be filled out digitally on the computer or by hand in blue or black ink. Acceptable documents are also required to prove citizenship and age for the child and identity for the kinship caregiver and the child. Keep in mind that these must be original documents, not copies. The good news is that there is no fee for an original or replacement Social Security card. However, there is a limit to how many replacement Social Security cards that the Social Security Administration will issue. A person can only obtain 3 replacements in 1 year and 10 in a lifetime. Next, we'll discuss who can apply for a Social Security card and where to apply. A parent, legal guardian, or a kinship caregiver with custody of or responsibility for a child may apply. A child may also apply on their own behalf if they meet certain requirements. The agency to apply with is the Social Security Administration. Regarding a person who has custody or responsibility, Social Security Administration gives us some guidance about this on their website, stating that if you are filing on behalf of someone else, an adult or a child, in addition to documents to prove age, identity, and citizenship status, they may ask you to provide documents that show you have custody of or responsibility for the person for whom you are filing. Examples of acceptable documents include court custody documentation, a letter from state social services placing the individual in your household, or other documents that show your relationship and responsibility, like a school record indicating that the individual has responsibility for the child, a physician's statement, or a rental agreement listing the child in the household of the applicant. The Social Security Administration also states in its operations manual that a child of any age who is physically and mentally capable of completing an in person interview or a paper application may file on their own behalf. So, if the child has that capability, this could be an option. Social Security Administration processes applications 3 different ways: in person, by mail, and online. For a kinship caregiver applying for a child, if going in person is an option, go to your local Social Security office. You may need to make an appointment. To find a local Social Security Administration office, go online to ssa.gov or call their toll free number, which is 1 800 772 1213. Another way is to apply by mail. Applying by mail requires that originals of required documents be mailed in. This can lead to important documents getting lost. If applying by mail, use a stable address to reduce the risk of problems with return documents. Finally, applications cannot be fully completed online for youth under the age of 18. The application can be started online, but you must follow up with an in person appointment to complete the process. One other thing to note is that if the child is age 12 or older and you are requesting an original Social Security number and card, not a replacement card, an in person interview of the child will be required. So that would mean an in person appointment. Now we'll discuss a couple of challenges that a kinship caregiver could face when applying for a Social Security card for the child. First, what if I am not one of the listed individuals allowed to request a Social Security card for the child? If you don't have legal custody of the child through a court order, another option may be a Chapter 34 non-parent authorization under the Family Code. This is the same authorization that Kayleen mentioned earlier, and it can give you permission to get copies of the child's birth certificate and Social Security card if it's properly executed. However, if you're not able to get a Chapter 34 authorization, remember that a person who is responsible for the child and can show proof by documentation should be able to get a copy on behalf of the child. Remember also that a parent or a child who is old enough to apply Those are also people who can apply. So if the child is competent to handle the application process themselves, or if the parent of the child is willing to help with the process, those may be solutions as well. It's possible that the person helping you on behalf of Social Security Administration may not be completely familiar with the requirements in situations like these. It may be necessary to ask to talk to a supervisor if you're getting wrongfully turned away. And again, you could reach out to our Kin Care program if you need assistance. Here's another example of a challenge a kinship caregiver might face when trying to get a copy of a child's Social Security card. What can I do if I'm unable to get the documents required for the application? Social Security Administration has specific policies about what kinds of documents they will accept to prove citizenship and age and identity. We realize that sometimes identification documents can be difficult to obtain. The first step is to make sure you understand what documents are required. You can find the form with information on applying for an original or replacement Social Security card at ssa.gov/forms/ss-5.pdf. The acceptable documents vary depending on the age of the child and whether the child is a U.S. citizen. If applying on behalf of the child, the applicant must also provide identification documents for the applicant and the child. If you're unable to obtain the documents listed, you may call Social Security Administration at 1-800-772-1213, and they may be able to provide some guidance or suggestions. If you're having trouble and need legal assistance, you can reach out to our Kin Care program. We'll have more information on that later in the presentation, including qualifications and how to apply. Now I'll turn it back over to Kayleen.
All right, now we'll discuss getting passports for a child in your care. Frankly, while this isn't impossible, it's extremely difficult if there's not a custody order in place signed by a judge that allows for a non-parent caregiver to obtain a passport for a child, or if there's not parents willing to assist the caregiver, it can be really difficult. Due to federal laws, someone cannot obtain a passport with a voluntary authorization or even a court-ordered authorization, but we'll go ahead and go over some of the basics. First, to apply for a child's passport, the requester or the person submitting the application will need to complete the Form DS-11, provide proof of the child's citizenship, proof of parental relationship, proof of parental consent, the parent's identification cards, the child's photo that meets the requirements of the passport office, and the necessary fees. So how do you know if you need a passport for a child? Each American citizen must have a valid passport to enter or depart the U.S. Basically, a child will need a passport if there are any plans for the child to leave the country. The only time this may not apply is for an infant traveling by land or sea, but they're still required in this scenario to present a birth certificate. As I mentioned earlier, getting a passport as a caregiver can be very difficult, and here's a little bit of reason why. For children 15 and under, there are two people that may apply: a parent or a caregiver with a court order signed by a judge that allows for the person to apply for a child's passport. If the child is 16 or 17, they have to show evidence that at least one legal parent or conservator is aware of the application, and they either have to be accompanied by a parent or have a parental note with a photocopy of the parent's ID or a note with a check or money order with the parent's name on it. Unlike the other two options, there's only one way to submit a passport application for a child, and that is at a passport facility in person. The option to do so by mail or online, like a birth certificate or social security card, isn't available when requesting a passport. So one question that caregivers may have is, what can I do if I'm not the parent and I don't have court-ordered custody? Unlike obtaining a birth certificate or social security card, the Chapter 34 authorization document that we previously discussed does not allow for a non-parent caregiver to apply for a passport on behalf of a child they're caring for. One option for a non-parent caregiver in this situation would be to ask parents that might be willing to be involved, if at all possible, for some assistance. For example, if they're able to maybe just join when it's time to go in person to the office, or for children that are older, 16 and 17, if they're able to go in person, maybe assist in at least showing that they approve by providing identification and the documents that are required in a letter giving their permission. The other option would be to try and get custody of the child by filing what is called a suit affecting the parent-child relationship, referred to as a SAPSR. However, this can be difficult for many reasons that we don't really have time to discuss fully during this webinar, but broadly, not just anybody can file this type of suit to try to get custody of a child. The Texas Family Code outlines exactly who is allowed to file a suit to try and get custody of a child, and this is called standing. This can also be very time consuming depending on several different factors. For more information about filing a SAPSR, especially as a non-parent, you can visit texaslawhelp.org. So what if one parent is willing to assist me? What options do I have to get the child's passport? In this scenario, it's important to understand what type of custody that one parent has that's willing to assist. If they have sole custody or they're the only parent, they'll have to show a court order granting them sole custody or some type of documentation supporting that they're the only parent for the child. If there are two parents, but for some reason one cannot be found, it's possible to submit what's called a statement of exigent or special family circumstances. This statement has to provide a detailed explanation of your efforts to contact the non-applying parent and any exigent circumstances that exist. Evidence will also need to be provided, such as a custody order, maybe an incarceration order, a restraining order, or some type of legal document that's going to provide evidence of the circumstance. And so in many scenarios, the non-parent caregiver is providing care because neither parent is around or able to really assist or help. So what happens if neither parent can go when it's time to take the child to get their passport? Once again, while there is an option, if mom and dad are not around, they're not involved or willing to be helpful, this can cause some hangups. The option here would be for the caregiver as a third party to get a notarized statement from both parents or whomever has custody of the children. The statement has to grant permission for the third party to apply for the child, and it also requires photocopies of the parent's identification. And similarly to what we discussed when there's only one parent, there has to be some sort of documentation that proves that they're either the sole conservator or the only parent to the child. Custody can only be granted by a court order signed by a judge. And so if the parent doesn't have a copy of their order, or you need to determine exactly what a custody order might say regarding a child, you can request a copy of that from the district clerk where the order was made. I'm going to hand it back over to Mary again to go over the last few items.
Next, we'll provide some tips related to keeping the original identification documents safe and some additional considerations. Once you've gone through the trouble of getting the original identification documents, keeping them safe is really important. So here are some tips on how to do that. Never mail an original identification document or give it to someone unless their identification is confirmed and giving an original is required. And one example of that could be applying for a Social Security card if that's necessary. If possible, submit a photocopy or a scanned version. Keep documents in a secure place and access them only when needed. Only carry an ID or a driver's license, not the other identification documents. If someone takes the originals to make copies, be sure that they're returned to you and keep them in a safe place. A password manager on a phone is another place to maintain a copy, but again, the original certified paper copy should be kept in a safe place. Generally, the birth certificate should be ordered before the Social Security card. Because the birth certificate is a useful identification document to have when applying for the Social Security card and other identification documents. Remember that application processing times may vary by agency, so understand that getting the documents will take time. You can help avoid delays by checking your applications to make sure that they are accurate and error free before submitting them. Do your homework and make sure you're prepared with everything you need before going to an appointment or submitting your application. If you're applying for a birth certificate, remember it's also possible to apply with the local county or city rather than the state vital statistics unit. Depending on the city or the county, the wait time may be shorter than going through the vital statistics unit. Finally, we'd like to share some resources with you that may be helpful to kinship caregivers who are trying to get identification documents or need legal assistance or for other issues they may be facing. First, I'd like to tell you a little bit about our KinCare project at Texas Legal Services Center. To qualify, applicants must have possession of the child, be a United States citizen or a legal permanent resident, be a resident of the state of Texas, and have a household income under 125% of the federal poverty guidelines. We currently have a grant that allows us to assist kinship caregivers whose income is up to 200% of the federal poverty guidelines, but that grant will be ending soon and we will be back to the 125% income limit. We will only be accepting new applications up to 200% for the next couple of months. We cannot assist with contested custody cases, grandparent visitation cases, child support enforcement, or active CPS court cases or interventions into CPS court cases. Although we can't help with active CPS court cases, we may be able to assist during CPS investigations if the allegations are against a kinship caregiver. If you're in need of this type of help, call the Family Helpline. We'll provide more information about the Family Helpline and the number later in the presentation. All right. At the KinCare Project, we help non-parent caregivers gain long-term safety and security for themselves and children in their care by providing legal assistance and advice. One of the things that we can help with is when kinship caregivers need help obtaining identification documents for the children in their care. So if you believe you qualify for the program, please feel free to reach out. We also provide legal advice and assistance on matters related to custody, non-parent authorizations, public benefits, and school issues. You can reach us by email at kincare@tlsc.org or by calling us at 512-477-6000 extension 216. And finally, I will touch briefly on these other resources. Texas Law Help is an excellent legal resource for people who are looking for free legal information on a variety of topics. This is another project of Texas Legal Services Center, and it can be especially helpful to people who are trying to represent themselves on legal matters. The website will also allow you to chat with an attorney from 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and they can often answer questions or help point people in the right direction. The web address is texaslawhelp.org. The mission of Grandparents Raising Grandchildren is to advocate for and empower grandparents raising grandchildren by providing access to resources, information, and support. The Texas Kin Care Guide was developed by child welfare attorneys at Texas Legal Services Center to help kinship caregivers get the information they need to successfully support themselves and their families. The DFPS Kinship Manual is a useful manual for kinship caregivers who have had children placed with them by Child Protective Services. The Parenting Order Legal Line is a Texas Legal Services Center program that provides an opportunity to chat with an attorney about parenting legal issues like visitation, custody, and modifications of those types of orders. The Texas Office of the Attorney General Child Support Division. If you need help establishing paternity, establishing, modifying, or enforcing a child support order, the OAG may be able to assist with that. Texas Free Legal Answers is a virtual legal advice clinic in which qualifying users post civil legal questions at no cost to be answered by pro bono attorneys licensed in their state. And finally, Community Christian Legal Aid is a program that assists relative kinship caregivers only. They may provide representation for suits affecting the parent-child relationship, kinship adoptions, and special needs guardianships in Harris, Montgomery, and Waller counties. They can represent or advise applicants who earn up to 400% of the federal poverty guidelines. On behalf of myself and the child welfare team here at Texas Legal Services Center, we appreciate you taking the time to attend our webinar today. To the Kinship Caregivers, thank you for the good work that you do every day and the difference that you're making in the lives of the children that you care for. We hope that the information and resources that we shared today were helpful to you. Thank you.